I never thought I'd be here, writing this. It feels surreal, like I'm living in someone else's life. My name's Daniel, and until about 6 months ago, I was on the verge of getting married. The woman I was about to marry, Natalie, was everything to me. I knew it was love, the kind you read about in books. We'd been together for almost 5 years, and the wedding day was all set. I had this dream of us, growing old together, building a life, maybe having kids, the whole thing. But nothing can prepare you for the moment when everything you thought you knew is ripped away. It happened like this. I was at my bachelor party, a low-key night with a few close friends. Just beers and laughter, no strippers or anything wild. But when I got home, something was off. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt like the house was empty. Not physically, but emotionally. My gut churned in a way I've never experienced before. It was a knot that wouldn't loosen. My phone buzzed. Natalie had sent me a message. She'd asked me to meet her at the house earlier than we planned. I ignored it at first. Maybe she just wanted to check on me, or maybe something was wrong. I didn't know then, but I was about to find out. I walked into our house, thinking maybe she'd be sitting in the living room, all dolled up for bed, waiting for me to come back and talk about the night. Instead, I found her on the couch, but she wasn't alone. There was a man sitting beside her, not some random guy, but someone I recognized. Someone from her past. His name was Alex. He was an old friend, someone she told me was just a buddy from high school. But the way they were looking at each other, the way they were so comfortable together, I knew instantly something wasn't right. My stomach dropped. I stood there frozen, my brain processing at 1,000,000 miles a minute, but not making sense of anything. And then she looked at me, her face going pale, her eyes wide with panic. I don't know what hurt more, seeing her with him, or the way she looked at me like a deer caught in headlights. "Dan," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. We need to talk." I didn't know what to say. Words wouldn't come. I could only see the reality of the situation crashing down around me. The man I thought I knew, the woman I thought I could trust, were now strangers to me. But what she said next was even worse than what I saw. "Dan, I don't know how to say this," she stammered, her hands trembling as she tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, instinctively pulling away. The last thing I wanted right now was her touch. "It's not what you think," she continued, her eyes darting nervously between me and Alex, who, for his part, just sat there looking awkward, like he didn't know whether to stand up, walk out, or pretend he wasn't there. But the damage had already been done. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to escape. I wanted to scream at her, demand to know how long this had been going on, but instead, all I could do was ask in the quietest voice I could muster, "How long?" She hesitated for a second, her eyes flickering to Alex again, like she was searching for permission or maybe approval. But she didn't get it. I wasn't going to let her off the hook. I wasn't the guy who would beg or cry or lose control. Not anymore. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it would shatter me. 2 months before we got engaged," she finally said, almost too softly for me to hear. Her voice broke on those words like they physically hurt her to speak, but not nearly as much as they hurt me. "It was a mistake, Dan. I never meant for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." A mistake. A mistake? I'd been with her for 5 years, and she tells me she made a mistake, a one-time slip? No. My brain couldn't reconcile the words. How did you explain 2 months of lying, 2 months of her hiding this from me, with a mistake? How could you look me in the eye and tell me that this was a mistake? What the hell were you thinking? I finally managed to choke out. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like I wasn't the one saying them. "We were planning to get married, Natalie. You let me propose to you while you were sleeping with him?" She recoiled, like I'd slapped her. "No, I didn't. I didn't know what to do. Alex and we had a moment, and then I felt guilty and didn't know how to end it. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at Alex, sitting there like an idiot, and that's when the fury started bubbling up. "And you?" I said, my voice shaking with the kind of anger I didn't even know I was capable of. "You're just as bad. You knew she was with me. You didn't care, did you?" Alex looked down at the floor, muttering something about how it was a complicated situation, and how he never wanted to cause trouble. But he didn't even try to apologize. Not once did he look me in the eye and admit what they'd done was wrong. And right then, I knew. This wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment. This wasn't some weak, one-off affair. This was betrayal, deliberate, calculated, and cold. I turned back to Natalie, feeling the weight of every second I'd spent loving her come crashing down on me. So this is how you repay me? After everything? My voice broke on the last word, but I refused to let her see how much it tore me up. I didn't know how to tell you, Dan. I thought. She cut off when I held up a hand, silencing her. There was nothing more to say. Nothing she could say would fix what she'd broken. I stared at her for a long time, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked out of our house, out of our life, and I didn't look back. Not even when I heard her calling after me, pleading for me to stay. But I didn't want to hear it. Not anymore. The next few days were a blur. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know who to talk to. My best friend, Mark, tried to reach out to me, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone. It felt like I was living in some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her eyes filled with guilt, and his. Alex's face, smug, as if nothing was wrong. I stayed with my brother for a week, just to get away from everything. But even then, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I kept asking myself the same question. How could I not have known? I thought we were happy. Hell, I knew we were. We had plans, we talked about the future, about our wedding, about kids. How could she lie to me for so long? How could I have missed something so big? But the thing that gnawed at me the most was the betrayal. I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that she had cheated on me before our wedding, before we even made that kind of commitment. That's when I realized it wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything that led up to it. I wasn't just angry at her. I was angry at myself. How could I be so blind? I'd put my trust in someone who didn't deserve it. And then, in the middle of my self-loathing, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to be that guy anymore. I wasn't going to sit here and wallow in pain, begging for answers I'd never get. I wasn't going to let her, or him, get away with this. I didn't know how yet, but I would make them pay for what they'd done. And not just in the obvious ways. No, I was going to get my revenge in a way that would make them both regret ever crossing me. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to be the fool. And I wasn't going to be the victim. For the first time in a long time, I felt clear-headed, like a weight had been lifted. The world wasn't over. It was just different now, and I was going to make it work for me. I just didn't know yet how far I was willing to go. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of confusion and anger. I tried to keep my distance from Natalie, but it wasn't easy. She would text me, call me, even show up at my brother's house uninvited, pleading for another chance. I couldn't even look at her without feeling a physical ache in my chest, like she'd cut out a piece of me and walked away with it. But what hurt more was knowing that she didn't care enough about me to stay loyal. The idea that she could so casually betray everything we'd built made me sick to my stomach. There was a part of me that wanted to go back to her, to forgive her, to try to salvage whatever was left. But that part of me, the part that had been naive and trusting, was dying. I had no interest in fixing something that was broken beyond repair. But it wasn't just about her. I couldn't let Alex get away with it either. He'd been in my life for too long, a so-called friend. And yet he'd crossed a line I couldn't ignore. What pissed me off the most wasn't just the affair. It was the way he acted like nothing had happened. He never once tried to apologize. Not once did he acknowledge how much he had screwed me over. It was as if the whole thing had been some casual fling to him, nothing more than a fun little secret. I needed to make him feel the consequences, just as much as Natalie. I wasn't going to do it in a rage-driven, impulsive way, though. I'd learned my lesson in that. I wasn't about to let my emotions dictate my actions anymore. No, I was going to be smart about this. And more than that, I was going to be the one in control. The first thing I did was reach out to a private investigator. I knew it might sound dramatic to some people, but after everything that had happened, I realized I couldn't trust anyone, not even the people closest to me. I needed to know everything about Alex, his background, his job, his connections, anything I could use to get leverage. If he thought he was going to get off scot-free, he was in for a surprise. It didn't take long for the investigator to gather information. Alex worked as a freelance graphic designer, and his schedule was relatively flexible. I learned that he lived in a modest apartment, that he had a reputation for being a bit of a ladies' man, and that he'd had a string of casual relationships before Natalie. Nothing particularly damaging, but there were patterns I could work with. One thing stood out, though. He had a history of falling out with people he considered friends. Some of his old roommates had stories about him being dishonest and untrustworthy, but no one had ever pushed the issue. Alex seemed to have a way of drifting through life without facing the consequences of his actions. Well, that was about to change. Meanwhile, Natalie kept trying to get through to me. I knew she was regretting what she'd done, but the truth was, I didn't care about her guilt. She had made her bed, and I wasn't about to lie in it with her. One night, she called me again, her voice trembling. "Dan, please. I love you. I know I made a huge mistake, but I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to make it right. I can't live with myself knowing what I've done to you." It took every ounce of willpower I had not to respond, not to give in, but I didn't. I simply hung up the phone. I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need her validation. What I needed was something different. Control. I wasn't going to let my life be defined by someone else's choices. As I stood there, staring at my phone, I made a decision. I was going to make Alex pay, not in a vengeful, impulsive way, but in a way that would hurt him in his core. And when I was done, I would walk away from this, stronger than before. The plan was already beginning to form in my mind. It wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't about to let them get away with it. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about me taking back control of my life. The days following that phone call felt oddly peaceful. There was a stillness to the chaos that had previously consumed me. I realized that part of my anger had shifted, not just towards Natalie and Alex, but towards myself. I had let myself become so wrapped up in them, in our perfect relationship, that I'd forgotten what it meant to truly trust myself. But now, it felt like I was waking up, seeing things for what they really were. The first part of my plan was simple. I needed to get close to Alex, closer than he'd ever expect. He still didn't think I knew the extent of the affair, which worked to my advantage. I decided that I'd play the part of the victim for a while. I'd let him think I was broken, that I was desperate for closure, for answers. It wasn't hard to get a meeting with him. A couple of casual text messages, acting like I just needed to talk, and he was more than happy to agree. "Hey man, I know things have been crazy between us. I just want to get some clarity, you know? Can we meet up for a drink? I won't hold anything against you. I just need to understand what happened." I messaged him one night. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. "Yeah, of course, man. I know things are messy, but I don't want any bad blood between us. I'll meet you at that bar we used to go to. 8 p.m.? Perfect." I showed up early, scanning the room for him, but I had no intention of making this a casual meeting. I was going to keep my emotions in check, but in my mind, I was already preparing for what I would say. Alex had no idea what was coming. I knew I had to make him feel guilty, make him realize what he'd lost, what he could never get back. When he arrived, I greeted him with a handshake, a smile, the kind of smile I'd been practicing in the mirror for days. We exchanged pleasantries, talked about the weather, life, whatever. It was all fake, of course, but he didn't know that. Not yet. The conversation started to shift when I casually mentioned how tough it was, dealing with the fallout of everything with Natalie. I played the broken man, vulnerable, emotional. I needed him to see me as weak, so that when I flipped the script, it would hit harder. "I'm just trying to figure out where it all went wrong, you know?" I said, taking a slow sip from my beer. Like, I trusted her. We had a future. We were going to get married. And then I find out she was with you. It's like I didn't even know her. You know what that's like, right? Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting away from mine for a moment. He was nervous. Good. He should be. "Dan, man, look, I didn't mean for things to go down like this," Alex stammered, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know this is hard for you, and I'm really sorry, all right? But you've got to know it wasn't like I didn't plan it. I didn't want it to happen, okay? Yeah, well, I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice low. You didn't plan it, but you sure as hell didn't stop it either, did you? He froze, his face turning pale. I could see the guilt in his eyes now, like I'd finally pressed the button. But this wasn't just guilt, it was fear too. Fear that the truth was finally coming out, and there was no way to take it back. I let the silence sit there for a moment, watching him squirm. When he finally spoke, his words were hesitant, unsure. I didn't want to hurt you, man. I thought it was just going to be a fling. I didn't think it'd get so serious, you know? I couldn't help myself. The bitterness that had been boiling inside me for weeks started spilling over. A fling? Is that what she was to you? After everything we went through together? You think that's what she meant to me? His face softened, and for a moment, I thought I might actually get through to him. He looked like he was about to apologize again, but I cut him off. No, I said sharply, leaning in closer now. You don't get to apologize. You don't get to pretend like this was just some mistake. This was betrayal. And I want you to know something, Alex. This isn't just on her. You made a choice to. You could have walked away, but you didn't. You decided to cross that line. And now it's my turn to make you feel what I'm feeling. I'm not just going to forget this. I'm going to make sure you regret it. His face paled even further, and I could tell he was starting to panic. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I wasn't done yet. I had one more piece of the puzzle I needed to place. Here's the thing, I said, sitting back and taking another sip of my drink. I've got the proof. Everything. Texts, pictures, everything you did behind my back. I didn't bring it up until now, but it's all here. And if you don't think it'll come back to bite you, think again. Alex's eyes widened, and I could almost see the fear in his pupils. He knew I wasn't bluffing. I stood up, ready to leave. So here's your choice. You can walk away right now, and this stays between us. Or you can keep trying to pretend this never happened, and I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. I walked out, leaving him sitting there, speechless. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd made my point, and now I had the upper hand. Revenge wasn't about anger anymore. It was about control. And for the first time in months, I felt like I had it. After that meeting with Alex, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge yet. It was just the control. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was the one making the decisions, not reacting to what had happened to me. I had the power now, and I knew exactly what to do with it. I didn't reach out to Natalie immediately after I left Alex that night. Part of me wanted to, just to see her squirm, to let her know that I knew everything and that I wasn't some fool who could be manipulated. But I had learned enough to know that I didn't need to rush it. She would come to me. She always did. And when she did, she wouldn't be able to hide her fear anymore. It wasn't until the following week that she called me again. I had been waiting for it. She sounded desperate on the phone, almost pleading for me to meet her. She begged, Dan, please. I need to see you. I can't live with myself anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay. There was something about her tone that made me realize just how far she had fallen. The woman who had once been so confident, so sure of herself, now sounded weak and broken. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy, but I quickly reminded myself that this was the woman who had shattered me, who had shattered us. Sympathy wasn't something she deserved. I don't think there's anything left to talk about, I said calmly, my voice colder than I intended. I had to keep it together. You made your choice, Natalie, and I'm not the guy you can just walk back to when it's convenient for you. She stammered for a moment, trying to find the right words. Dan, please. I've been to therapy. I've been trying to understand what I did. I made a huge mistake, but it's over. I'm done with Alex. I want to be with you. I love you. I want to fix this. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not because I wanted to believe them. I didn't. But because I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. She wasn't even sorry for what she'd done. She wasn't apologizing because she regretted betraying me. She was sorry because she got caught. She wanted to fix it because she was uncomfortable with the consequences, not because she truly cared about me. I'm not interested in fixing anything with you, Natalie, I replied, my voice firm. What you did isn't something that can be fixed. And honestly, I don't think you even understand why it's so bad. You broke me, you broke us, and I'm not willing to forgive that. Not now. Not ever. There was a long silence on the other end. She probably didn't expect me to be so cold, so detached. I think she thought I would crumble, that I would eventually beg her to come back. But I wasn't that man anymore. I was done being the guy who put everyone else's needs before my own, the guy who believed in fairy tales. This was real life, and in real life, people got hurt, and sometimes that hurt was deserved. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she whispered, her voice shaking now. I just want to know that you won't hate me forever. I'm not here to make you feel better, Natalie, I said flatly. I'm not here to coddle your guilt. You made your bed. Now, you have to lie in it. I hung up before she could say another word. As I stared at my phone, I realized I wasn't just done with her. I was done with everything. Done with the lies. Done with pretending. Done with allowing myself to be second-guessing, confused. It was time to stop thinking of her as the woman I loved and start seeing her for what she truly was. Someone who wasn't capable of love, not the way I needed it. And it wasn't just her anymore. I was going to make sure Alex felt every ounce of the damage he'd done too. He hadn't learned his lesson yet, not by a long shot. I could still hear his voice in my head, trying to justify his actions, trying to downplay the affair. But it didn't matter. I wasn't going to let it slide. Not after everything they'd taken from me. The next step of my plan was already in motion. I wasn't going to just move on. I was going to make sure that Alex and Natalie knew exactly what they had lost. I was going to make them pay, but I was going to do it on my terms, at my pace. And once I was finished, they'd both know who I really was. A man who wouldn't be broken. Not now. Not ever. That I couldn't just let this slide. The way Alex and Natalie had gone behind my back. The way they thought they could betray me without consequences. No, they needed to know that actions have repercussions. But I wasn't going to do something reckless or impulsive. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes they had. My plan needed to be methodical, calculated, and above all, it needed to hurt them in a way they could never forget. I spent the next few days gathering more intel. I dug into Alex's life, finding out who he had burned in the past, who had grudges against him. It was strange. The way people who once trusted him now spoke in whispers when his name came up. But I knew something important. If I could turn some of those relationships to my advantage, I could build pressure from all sides. I was working with a private investigator, but the real heavy lifting was done by a network of people I knew. Some I hadn't spoken to in years, but that didn't matter. I knew how to make people listen when I needed them to. The more I pieced together, the clearer it became that Alex had a history of exploiting people, treating them as expendable, like pawns in a game he was always trying to win. The investigator dug up dirt, things about Alex's financial history that would ruin him if they got out. His debts were larger than I expected, and there were reports of shady dealings with suppliers for his freelance work. People had a lot to say when they were pushed, and I was about to push. The best part? I had already spoken to a lawyer about the best way to use all this information without getting myself into trouble. The legal angles were important. I couldn't afford to be reckless. The idea was simple. I was going to leverage his dirt, his financial ruin, his shady business practices, and I was going to turn it into a firestorm. I would make Alex's life impossible, but I had to move carefully, with precision. I sent Alex a few texts, asking if we could meet again, this time to clear the air. He agreed right away. The opportunity was too perfect. I showed up early again, but this time, I wasn't there to share my pain or get an apology. I was there to tighten the noose around Alex's neck. When Alex walked into the bar, he was clearly more relaxed than before. He thought I had calmed down. He thought the worst was behind him, but he couldn't have been more wrong. I let him do all the talking for a while, letting him apologize again, let him ramble about how messed up everything was and how guilt had eaten him alive. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I just sat there, looking at him with cold detachment, as if I was waiting for him to prove something, waiting for him to do something that would seal his fate. He finally stopped, catching my eye. Dan, look, I don't know how I can fix this, but I want to try. Fix this? I repeated, leaning in, my voice flat. You don't get to fix anything. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. He blinked, confusion clouding his expression. What do you mean? I smiled, the cold, calculated kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. You've been using people your whole life, Alex. It's time for someone to do the same to you. His face twisted with disbelief. What are you talking about? I haven't been using anyone. I cut him off with a cold laugh. I know about the debts, Alex. The money you owe to people who could ruin your career. I know about the shady deals you've been making. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? But I've been doing my homework. His eyes widened, and I could see the panic starting to set in. He was backing away from the table, instinctively trying to deflect, but it was too late. I don't know what you think you can do with this information, he stammered, his voice rising with tension. But you have no idea who you're messing with. Trust me, I said, leaning back with a smirk. I know exactly who I'm messing with. I slid a folder across the table to him. Copies of the financial records, the emails, the conversations that proved everything. He flipped through it, his face turning pale as he recognized the documentation. I could make sure this all goes public, Alex, I continued, my voice low. I could send these to your clients, your partners, and let's see how quickly your reputation crumbles. Let's see if anyone trusts you after they know the truth. His fingers shook as he looked at the papers, his eyes darting between the documents and my face. You wouldn't do that. Try me. I had him. I knew it, and he knew it. He had nothing left to threaten me with. His dirty little secrets were exposed, and now I was the one holding all the power. Please, he said, his voice breaking. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was stupid. I messed up, but I never wanted to hurt you. I could see him scrambling for something, anything, that might get him out of this situation. But there was nothing left for him to say. I'm not interested in your apologies, I said coldly. You made your choices, and now you'll live with them. Just like I have to live with the fact that you betrayed me. You'll be lucky if this doesn't end your career, Alex. I'm done here. I left the bar, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Not because I had one. Not because I'd crushed Alex's world. But because I had done what I set out to do. I had taken control, turned the tables, and left him with nothing. Over the next few days, things started to fall apart for Alex. It wasn't immediate, but the pressure was mounting. His clients started to back out, his freelance contracts began to dwindle, and rumors started circulating. Word gets out when you make enemies, and Alex had made too many. The things I knew about him, the things I could use, were spreading slowly, but surely. By the time he reached out again, his voice was desperate. Dan, you can't do this. You have to understand. I can fix this. I can make it right. Just please, don't send it all out. I'll lose everything. I didn't respond right away. I let him sweat for a few days, just like he had made me sweat when I didn't know the full extent of his betrayal. He had underestimated me, and now it was too late for him to fix it. But the thing that really got to me, the thing that made me realize how deep his guilt went, was when he asked me to meet him again. Only this time, it wasn't to apologize or explain. It was because he knew he had no other choice. He wanted to buy me off. I'll pay you, he said, almost pleading. I'll give you whatever you want. Just end this. The audacity of him. I wasn't in this for money. I didn't need a bribe. I needed him to face the consequences of what he had done. I don't need your money, Alex. What you need is to disappear. And I think you're starting to understand that. Weeks had passed, and I had taken my revenge on Alex. His life was in shambles, but Natalie, she was a different story. She still tried to reach out, calling, texting, even sending me emails. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something she wasn't telling me, something deeper. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was fear. Either way, I knew I had to face her one last time, to make sure she understood the consequences of her actions. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop. The last time we'd been in the same room, she had tried to act like nothing had happened. She didn't get it, not fully. She didn't understand the depth of what she'd done, but I was about to show her. She sat across from me, looking nervous but determined. Dan, I'm sorry. I can't keep doing this. I know what I did was awful, and I've been trying to figure out how to fix it, how to make things right between us. I stared at her, my expression unreadable. You think you can fix it? I asked. After everything you've done? You think saying sorry is enough? Her voice cracked. I never meant to hurt you. I was confused and Don't, I interrupted. Just don't. It's too late for that now. She looked down, defeated. I know, but please, tell me what I can do to make it up to you. I'll do anything. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. I almost laughed at the irony. I could have said so many things. I could have torn her apart, made her feel even worse than she already did. But I didn't. Instead, I just said one thing, something simple but final. I don't need you to make it right, Natalie. I just need you to understand that I'm done. And with that, I stood up, leaving her behind, knowing that I had finally taken control of my life. After I left Natalie that day, I didn't look back. It was over. I had walked away, and this time, I didn't feel like I was losing anything. It wasn't relief. I wasn't at peace yet. But it was something else, strength. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like I had my feet under me again. Like I wasn't some victim of circumstance, caught in a storm I couldn't control. There were days where I would sit alone, replaying everything in my head, trying to piece together how I'd missed the signs. There was the nagging question that lingered. Did I really know her at all? But that kind of thinking wasn't going to get me anywhere. I had to remind myself, again and again, that this wasn't my fault. She made her choices. Alex made his. And now, they had to deal with the consequences. I stayed silent. I didn't talk to anyone about what happened. No one outside of my closest friends knew the full story. I didn't want pity. I didn't need anyone telling me they understood how I felt. I was angry, yes. I was hurt, yes. But I wasn't weak. I wasn't going to be the guy who wallowed in self-pity, who let the betrayal define him. I was going to keep moving forward. A month passed. I didn't hear from Natalie again. But then, one morning, I woke up to a message on my phone. It was from someone I hadn't expected to hear from, Mark, my best friend. Hey man, can you talk? It's important. My gut tightened. It was odd for Mark to reach out like this, especially after everything that had gone down. I figured it was something to do with the fallout from Alex, or maybe he had heard more rumors. Either way, I wasn't ready for what he had to say. We met up at a bar later that evening. Mark didn't waste time. Dan, I don't know how to say this, but there's something you need to know. About Natalie. I clenched my fists under the table, but I kept my voice steady. What's going on, Mark? Mark leaned in, his face serious. It's not just about what happened between you two. She's been calling me, texting me, telling me things she's never told anyone else. About the affair. About how it was never just a mistake to her. I raised an eyebrow, confused. What do you mean? What's she saying? He hesitated before speaking, as if the words themselves weighed too much. She's saying that she's always felt this way, that she never really loved you, that she stayed with you because you were safe, because you were the good guy. But with Alex, she felt alive. She wanted something dangerous, something she couldn't have. It felt like someone had just hit me in the chest. My throat tightened, and I suddenly felt like I was suffocating. She said that? Mark nodded. Yeah, and Dan, she's been calling people, mutual friends, trying to get back in your life. But it's not because she wants you back. It's because she's scared. She's been telling people that she's feeling guilty, but she's not sorry. She's just afraid of losing everything. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the information. Everything I thought I knew about her. Everything I had convinced myself was true. It was all a lie. A damn lie. I didn't ask you to tell me this, Mark, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. But thanks, I guess. I needed to hear it. I needed to know the truth. I spent the next few days in a haze. My head was spinning with everything Mark had told me. Natalie had never loved me. She had stayed with me because I was a safe choice, someone who would never make her feel uncomfortable, someone who would never challenge her. She'd always wanted something more dangerous, more thrilling. Alex was the escape, the thrill. I had never meant to be someone's second choice. But that's what I had been. And that revelation hurt more than anything. But as much as it stung, I wasn't going to let it destroy me. I had already let the woman I loved betray me once, and I wasn't about to let her do it again. This time, to my pride, to my sense of self. I had learned that love wasn't just about passion and excitement. It was about loyalty, trust, respect, and I had given all of that to someone who didn't deserve it. I didn't need her. I didn't need any of them. I didn't reach out to Natalie after Mark's conversation. I didn't need to. I had taken control, and now I had to finish what I'd started. But what I hadn't expected was for her to come to me. It happened a few weeks later. She showed up at my door one evening, looking disheveled, a mess of emotions. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged like she'd been crying for hours. "I'm sorry, Dan. I was wrong. I see that now. I've always known it, deep down," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But please, don't let me lose you." I could see the desperation in her eyes. But this time, it didn't move me. I had no sympathy for her. None. She had chosen her path, and now she had to live with the consequences. "You don't get to do this, Natalie," I said, my voice firm. "You don't get to waltz back into my life and pretend like everything's okay. You don't get to erase what you've done. You don't get to take back the choice you made." Her face crumpled, and she reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "I'm not the guy you can come to when you need someone to make you feel better," I said coldly. "You broke me, but I'm done. I'm done trying to save you. You made your bed, Natalie. Now you can lie in it." She stared at me for a long time, her lips trembling, but she didn't say anything more. She turned and walked away, and I watched her go. I didn't feel a sense of victory or triumph. There was no joy in seeing her hurt, but there was peace. Finally, I had closure. A year passed. Life moved on. I focused on myself, on rebuilding the parts of me that had been shattered. The anger faded. The bitterness melted away. I got back into my routine, but I wasn't the same person anymore. I started dating again, slowly, cautiously. I didn't expect to find love right away. I wasn't ready for it. But I began to trust myself again, to believe that I deserved someone who would love me fully, someone who would choose me, not because I was safe or convenient, but because I was exactly who they wanted. One evening, I ran into Mark at a bar. We sat down and caught up, and after a few drinks, he looked at me with a knowing smile. "So, how's it going with the new girl?" he asked. I shrugged. "It's good. We're taking it slow, but I think it could go somewhere." "That's good to hear," Mark said, his grin widening. "I always knew you'd be all right. You've got a hell of a comeback in you." I smiled. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't a smile of resignation. It was a smile of genuine confidence. I had come back from everything, from the betrayal, from the lies, from the heartbreak. And now? Now, I was in control of my own life. I was the man I was always meant to be. Not the one I was before her, but the one I am now. And that man? He's untouchable.